Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's podcast. My name is Marcia Allen, and I'm joined here today with my friend Angela Patterson. And today's topic will be a trail of trauma. And we're going to jump right into the discussion, and I'm going to have my friend Angela define trauma from the DSM-5. Angela?
Hello, everyone. My name is Angela, and I will be discussing the definition of trauma as it relates to the DSM. The DSM-5 is actually the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual of all mental illnesses. The DSM-5 defines trauma as an event that causes lasting adverse effects. It also involves a threat or danger such as death, serious injury, or even sexual violence. So that would be more like accidents, assaults like rape, and even natural disasters. We can talk about trauma as being experienced directly, or it could be witnessed. It could be learned from other people. So basically, bad news that can be traumatizing. And I'll give it back to Marcia.
So I'm glad that you brought up the definition of trauma from the DSM-5 because it gives you all the different ways in which trauma can be experienced. Because the misunderstanding, I think, with trauma is that it involves that it evolves from your childhood, and it doesn't. Trauma can be, to put it in layman's terms, whenever a person experiences a distressing event at any time where the person feels overwhelmed or unable to cope. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it happened in your childhood. But people who are seeking therapy or counseling, they may wonder, why do therapists ask questions about your childhood? And it's because, number one, they don't know your past history. Therefore, that's their way of finding out. And so in order to, get an understanding, that's where they start. They are assessing what you tell them, which tells them where your trauma began.
Right, right.
It could be any type of stress that you experienced in your lifetime that caused that shift, in your brain's pattern of thoughts. And you don't realize that it's happening, of course, but it changes how you behave moving forward.
Right. Yeah, you made a good point there because trauma actually does have a lasting impact on your mind and on your body. So when people tell you to just move on or get over it, it's like way more complex than that.
Yeah, I agree. It is. As soon as we began, like discussing the topic, it occurred to me at some point in your life, you have to understand that it's okay to go back to those areas of trauma in your life with the guidance of a therapist.
Right.
If you find yourself experiencing distress in your life, you need to have a therapist or counselor present. But understand, revisiting your trauma without professional help, you run the risk of re-traumatizing or hindering your recovery. So please seek professional support to guide you along your journey. In this case, it would be okay to go to those places of the impact of trauma for self-assessing purposes, to try to understand and learn how you present yourself and respond to the world. That would be the reason
Right.
we'll go back to those areas of trauma.
Right. You're exactly right, because taking care of yourself and take yourself back to the very thing that caused the stress in the first place, the traumatic event, going back to revisit it. And a lot of people, believe it or not, a lot of people are scared to revisit that area because it's just a fear that it'll take them into a deep depression.
Yes.
And they're scared that they'll go into a depression that, so much so that they can't come out of that depression. And
Right.
that unfortunately happens to some people. So they'll go so deep into it and it'll consume them so much. So that's why people go into major depression or even be diagnosed with major depressive disorder. And we all know that depression actually will eventually lead to suicide or even homicide. There was a whole lot lost during COVID, where a lot of depression during COVID, and people are still depressed, believe it or not. even more depressed now than they were then,
Yeah.
because of the fact that people who are already suffering from depression and anxiety, and then all these other mental illnesses, and then there was COVID. So basically, COVID kind of added to it.
Yeah.
A lot of people never came out of that particular state of mind. And so that's a lot of reason why we saw the crime rate increase. People
Yeah.
just couldn't, they just couldn't deal with it. People lost a lot. Some people lost family members. Some people lost their
Yeah.
whole families. Uh,
Yes.
some people lost their jobs. Some people lost friends. And also, they were just completely just consumed by the situation itself. And like I was saying about trauma that can be as a natural disaster, that was actually a natural disaster that
Yes.
affected everyone, pretty much everyone um, in society. Everybody was affected on some level.
Yeah. Everybody was affected on some level. You're right, and I'm glad that you brought up COVID because COVID is a very good example of the
Mm-hmm.
mental state of not just individuals but our country
Mm-hmm.
and as
Mm-hmm.
human beings, and how we face that epidemic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It brought us to the fork in the road, so to speak, on facing our own mental health.
Right.
Um, we might not realize this, but COVID was what you would call an acute post traumatic stress
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
disorder event.
Right.
But prior to COVID, though, we were not really checking in with ourselves back then mentally, so
Mm-hmm.
COVID kind of brought us to that point of understanding and reckoning. COVID forced people to think about their mental health because of all of the psychological changes in their
Right.
mind and in their bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Everything changing. And so the brain was in a deep distress when people
Mm-hmm.
were isolated.
Right.
Uh, People couldn't work, they couldn't
Mm-hmm.
go outside or
Right.
to the store, even without the fear of catching COVID.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And people were dying, and
Right.
with some serious tragedies with friends and family members. So if you were forced into that mental state, you didn't know it, but you were actually tapping into trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and
Mm-hmm.
most important, you were forced to tap into your emotional intelligence.
Right. Right.
So, in the book, The Mountain Is You by Brianna Wiest, she defines emotional intelligence as the ability to understand, interpret, and respond to emotions in an enlightened and healthy way. And in doing so, that creates resilience. So the more you go through the area of trauma and try to understand what's going on, the more you do that, the more you will see why it's okay to go back there. Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
but it's also the ability to interpret the sensations that come up in your emotional well-being. Because let's face it, when we're going through trauma, the body is going through is feeling some type of sensation.
Right. Right.
And so we need to know how to navigate that when that happens. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, conflicts through your encounter, you're going to see some connections with that when you have
Right.
those encounters. And that's why it's important to be vigilant. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
we're talking through life and responding to the world based off of the people who raised us, our
Right.
adults,
Mm-hmm.
as adults, we take what we've learned and introduced our social skills to the world around us. That is when we learn how to navigate interpersonal relationships and conflicts.
Mm-hmm.
So you and I were brought up in a healthy environment,
Mm-hmm.
but we know that it's not always the case for some individuals. So tapping into your trauma and developing a healthy emotional intelligence, that's going to create the ability to interpret the world and respond to the world in a healthy way, by turning inward and taking a close look at ourselves and asking, what have I gone through? What could I have possibly gone through that may have caused me to think this way? When I
Mm-hmm.
just take a closer look at trauma.
Right. Exactly. And so that's exactly right. And also to know that trauma itself is subjective.
Yes.
So what that means is that what may affect one person may not affect the other person as it relates to trauma. And as we were talking about COVID, we were all affected by COVID in some form or fashion.
It's true.
with me working in the medical field and being on the front line of this thing, tackling it firsthand, it also affected me personally on an emotional level, physical and mental level.
Mm,
We were all affected some type of way, but it's the way we handle the stress as individuals would be more related to personal history. The way we handle it would be related more to our support system and
yeah.
also, like you said, our resilience because, who we were before. I could say pre-COVID. Um,
Mm,
how were we handling our personal lives then, before COVID? What type of support systems did we already have in place when COVID took place? And how resilient of a person were we already when COVID took place? So that actually did help a lot. And that's why I say it affected some people more than it affected other people. Majority of the world was affected, but didn't really know how to cope.
yes.
And just
Agreed.
to think about it, we were talking about people who lost their whole families.
Mm,
Like how do you come back from that,
exactly. That's something that we can't say that we understand because we hadn't been there. I
Right.
mean, they know of someone
Mhm.
who passed away, but I really don't know of anyone in
Mhm.
particular. But I'm
Mhm.
so glad that you brought up coping
Right.
because coping mechanisms are really interesting.
Mhm. Mhm.
Coping mechanisms are behaviors or mental strategies we use to manage stress, anxiety,
Right.
and negative emotions.
Mhm.
So, coping mechanisms to me would be whatever habits you consciously or subconsciously form as a
Mhm.
result of a way of dealing with
Mhm.
adversity and things like that. Going back to COVID, a lot of people resorted to alcohol.
Mhm.
Alcohol rate increased significantly, and I think still to
Right.
this day, we're still feeling the effects of that.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, People are trying to recover, even after so many years of post COVID. We're still trying to recover from that, and it's all happened due to the degree of isolation, though.
Right.
And isolation from COVID caused our coping mechanisms
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
ignite, so to speak.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So that's how people were coping. And when I say conscious and unconsciously, it's because coping mechanisms, they come on subtly. You go from I'm having a drink, or I'll just have one more,
Mhm.
then, I'm having a drink because I had a long day,
Right.
um, or I'm just having a drink to take the edge off. Uh,
Mhm. Mhm.
and what I think the world realized was that they were taking the edge off quite a bit
Yep.
during it.
Right. Right.
Like I said, you bringing up COVID was spot on good example of trauma. When you think about trauma, it's not always going to be referred to as a fatal or tragic accident, although it was with the death rate and all of that, and
Mhm.
people having to handle it. But
Yep.
through the subtle onset, though, of that event, it came out in our coping mechanisms,
Right. Right. Right.
which is the reason why we want to self assess, though,
Mhm.
because fall into those coping mechanisms, it can have some damaging effects, and abusing those copings and failure to rely or delve into looking
Mhm.
at what the real issue is,
Right.
those mechanisms are going to get worse. Yeah. So they're going
Exactly.
to show up when you don't want them to, and it's
Mhm.
going to force you into self-awareness at some point.
Right, right, exactly. And so, while we were talking about coping, you have different types of coping. You have negative coping as well. Then you have positive coping.
Mm.
And unfortunately, most people don't understand positive coping, a positive coping mechanism. Like you said, most people will return to drinking, drugs, etc. And some people even just avoid and isolate. They
Yeah.
don't think that they don't think that's a good coping mechanism, but isolation is not always a good coping mechanism, especially when you're already dealing with depression.
Yes.
Um, that's basically the worst thing you can do is try to isolate while you're already depressed. Right, right. Okay. And as we talk about silence, silence is actually a form of communication. People don't realize that they go silent and they feel like I'm just gonna not talk. about this,
Mm-hmm.
and so what that is withdrawing. So people will withdraw more because they don't want to talk about a lot of things, and it's hard to get people, especially people who are depressed, to talk. It's hard to get them to talk, and it's hard to get them to go outside. It's hard to get them to mingle and engage with people. And sometimes that's okay because you have to give people space and you got to give them time. And sometimes they'll come around on their own time. But when you have a person that's already depressed like that, more than likely they're not going to come around on their own.
Yeah, and when you were talking about when people make the decision not to talk,
Mm-hmm.
um, it's like sticking a pin to a balloon. The pressure builds up, and then it just pops.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
you brought
Mm-hmm.
up yesterday. You and I were discussing dissociation.
This
Um,
oh yes, dissociation.
about dissociation.
Yeah, so a lot of times we talk about dissociation, people don't even really understand what dissociation is. I know we hear it a lot, we see it a lot, but a lot of people really just don't understand what that is. It's actually what I would say my definition would be like disconnecting of thoughts. Um, um, you can try to disconnect from a memory.
Mm,
Um, you can disconnect from people. You know, and to it's only to protect yourself. A lot of this people dissociate so they can protect themselves, so they can protect their own mental health. Just like me and you, basically, we're pretty okay with just being by ourselves. We're
yeah,
pretty okay with being alone. There's others that can separate themselves from other people as well and feel absolutely nothing.
yeah.
That's pretty much how it is. It's basically you separating yourself from other people, or not even just people, disassociating yourself or separating yourself from a thing,
Mm-hmm.
or a thought. You can even try to separate yourself from a certain emotion. You know, like a lot of people who have been traumatized, they sometimes a certain emotion can be a trigger. That's why people who have things like bipolar, where
Yeah.
they are triggered by external things and they're also triggered by internal. So some people will just avoid altogether, because they know that some people have emotional dysregulation. So they know they can't control their emotions. So they prefer to just disconnect from that thing. But it's just like, you separate yourself from emotions. You're not embracing the emotions and trying to seek it out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and just trying to see, why am I feeling this particular emotion? Why am
Yeah.
I feeling like this? That's basically what we talked about earlier about self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
So basically that's what this is. When you stop to ask yourself and embrace that emotion and trying to seek it out and see why you're feeling this particular emotion, that's self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And where is this emotion coming from?
Exactly. Failure to do so creates that pressure, though. My mother used to tell me all the time, as a young person, she would tell me to be careful what you take on as life events, life situations with people, things that you're involved in relationships, the things that you take on as adversities and things like that. She used to say to be careful with yourself, and that because you don't realize the extent over time that it does on your body and your mind, and dissociating and things like that. It's like a wound. So if you cover it's going to go to other places. And that's what trauma does, especially when you're dealing with toxic relationships that are not pleasing to us. When we're in relationships that are not pleasing to us, we don't immediately express. So dissociating is a way that the mind copes with too much stress. So it
Mm-hmm.
goes to other areas of your body and your mind, like you're going to take a drink, or, you're going to take this trip, or you're going to go blow this money, or, you only live once.
Mm-hmm.
Those are coping mechanisms.
Right. And that's exactly what it is. You're disconnecting from reality. You're disconnecting from what's really going on around you.
Yeah.
Sometimes you try to disconnect from your own identity. You can get lost in yourself. You can get lost. Sometimes people get lost in a book, or they can get lost in a movie.
Mhm.
But you're completely disconnecting from everything, and that's not always healthy.
You're right, it's not always healthy. So a positive way of disconnecting, like you said, positive coping mechanisms,
Mhm.
that's good. So to know that there's there's negative coping mechanisms and then there's positive coping mechanisms,
Mhm.
that is a good thing to know.
Mhm. Yep.
Exercising, I found that exercising was something that really helped me blow off steam.
Mhm.
Listening to my audiobooks. I love listening to audiobooks and things
Mhm.
like that. It really helped me to learn new habits because the longer you're exposed to whatever it is, whether it's positive or negative, it does form a pattern in your brain. It forms, people don't realize that, but during my applied behavioral analysis class, we actually
Mhm.
took a look at a brain
Mhm.
as it was being introduced to different concepts
Mhm. Mhm.
and like happy things, sad things, and how the
Right.
brain responds to it. And it was actually showing up on an MRI. And it really shocked me, that we have this technology where you can look at someone having an emotion. And
Mhm.
so what's happening is, when information comes in through the frontal cortex, it goes in and forms these patterns. And these patterns, depending on the impact on these patterns, like the trauma,
Mhm.
for instance,
Mhm.
if you witness a traumatic impact or something like that, the brain is going to form a groove in your brain. Depending on the impact, those patterns go deeper and deeper. And that's what's causing those ruminating thoughts, believe it or not.
Mhm.
The ruminating thoughts, the more you think about something, the deeper the patterns in the brain, those grooves. And that's why you can't get out of your thoughts sometimes because of the
Mhm.
impact of the trauma.
Right. You're definitely right. And you talking about the frontal cortex or the prefrontal cortex.
Yep. Yeah.
The prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that actually control rational thinking.
Mm.
It controls decision making. It controls planning, right? And so during a traumatic event, the prefrontal cortex would be hard to make those decisions. It'll be
Mhm.
hard because you can't think rationally,
Right.
especially during trauma. Um, you don't have the ability to make clear decisions, because what's happening during that time is when your body is thrown into that fight or flight mode. And we go into fear and then we go into survival. And so just think about what's happening during that time. You're going from fear to survival. And then what do you think happens to the brain when you go from fear to survival for years?
Mm.
I mean, what do you think is happening when you're in a constant state of fear and then you're in a constant state of survival?
Right. They say the brain, when it's receiving information, only about 10% of it is actually used in everyday life. The remaining 90% goes into a saved file to use at a later time. So the point I'm trying to make is your brain is constantly processing
Mm-hmm.
information and
Mm-hmm.
it can have an effect on you in a way that like we have limited amount of emotional processing as it is. So we only have a limited amount of emotional processing skills.
Mm-hmm.
So, that it becomes important when taking
Mm-hmm.
in information. Be careful with
Right.
because it goes back to what my mother was saying, to just be careful about what you're experiencing and what you will allow in your life. It
Mm-hmm.
can have an effect on you. And so we have to be careful what we choose to focus on and the degree to which we focus on it
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
it can come out and show up in forms like anxiety,
Right.
depression, and things like that.
Right.
So
Right.
that's our body's way of telling us, what's going on.
That's exactly right. Um, um, a lot of times, a lot of people would ask, how do you cope with this? How do you do what you do?
Yeah.
How do you cope with trauma? There's a
Yeah.
lot of ways you can cope with trauma. You can, first of all, you can seek help. Um, there's always help. Um, and a lot of times that's something that a lot of people don't want to do.
Yeah.
Um, there's a lot of help out there. There's a lot of help that has been made available recently. I put it like
Mhm.
that. There's people that's readily available to help and coach you through things. You build your support system. Like me and Marcia, we had to build each other support. We were there. We supported each other. So we basically build
Right,
each other up. We were there to listen to each other. We were actively listening. We were listening to understand, not listening to respond, not listening to judge. I had to find my
right.
support system when I went through what I went through, the narcissistic relationship. And so where I went to first was not my support system. And sometimes that happens. It actually caused
Yeah.
me to feel even worse about the situation that I was dealing with. So I felt like I was being re-victimized because
Mm.
sometimes the very people that are that or the person that you think is going to be that support for you
Mhm.
um, will had a tendency to kind of like tear you back down. And, like we talk about this, say, they'll say some things like just get over it or just get past it. And you hear it a lot when you're experiencing something that's traumatizing or something that you're trying to heal from. And then hearing that, or those type of responses, uh,
Yeah.
really just seem to take you backwards and seems like you have to just start all over.
Yeah, we live in a bubble and our immediate people are just that. We tend to make them our go-tos. We tend to make them our immediate go-tos. And so we assume that those people, when we've talked about this in our other episodes, that when we go to these family members, our close friends and things like that, we tend to think that they're going to be able to comfort us in the way that and address things that
Mm-hmm.
we in a way that we expect.
Right.
And but I remember I remember that those people they had limited amounts of information.
Right.
They only had one side of the story,
Mm-hmm.
which
Right.
was my side.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to remember that they were limited in the amount of information that they had, and they hadn't been through it.
Right.
They're getting the information from one perspective,
Right.
um, which is that's coming from love too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They love us, and they can't really see us going through anything like that anyway in the
Exactly.
first place. So
Exactly.
um,
Exactly.
they just don't see the other side. And I was also going to say that when you do have those negative responses to those people that you reach out to, it does re-victimize you, as you said. I like how you said that. It adds to your trauma,
Mm-hmm.
so kind of tend to go inward. But I believe it's a saving grace at the same time because it's opening you up to understand the world better
Mm-hmm.
around you.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
because the people around us are, we're not perfect and they're not perfect. So
Right.
we're all learning through having these exchanges with people that you're
Mm-hmm.
learning how to understand the world around you. And so the wheels start turning. And when you're
Mm-hmm.
in a relationship where you've already been traumatized and you've already been seeing the red flags and on the situations, and then you start reaching out to your quote unquote people,
Mm-hmm.
that's
Mm-hmm.
when you pretty much learn that they aren't the go tos.
Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm reading this book. Um, it's called Find Your People
Mm-hmm.
by Jenny Allen. And it's about building a deep community in a lonely world. And that book is really good. And I'm telling you, learning how to find your people is vital to how you learn about yourself.
Right.
Um, that and learning your trauma too. Together, they can really be your saving grace later on in life. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like you said, I think we talked about that before, practicing cognitive reappraisals,
Hmm.
reframing thoughts about something. Just like you and I, we talk about things
Yes.
that we suffered through, and and we don't have the same emotional response now that we did before,
Oh yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
that's what cognitive reappraisal is. It's basically going to revisit or talk about the things that we've experienced already. And
Hmm.
then we understand now the way we responded to things on an emotional level, uh, how we wouldn't respond in that same way now.
Mm, exactly. That part right there is amazing. it's amazing to revisit. You're revisiting a past trauma because what's going to happen is you're going to come to that realization that the person you were back then has evolved
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
into a whole new and mentally healthier
Mhm.
person. Um, you're not going to recognize that traumatized person anymore, basically.
Mhm. Mhm.
Uh, and that's why it's so hard for people to see us now. They couldn't imagine us being those vulnerable people,
Right.
but we really were those
Right.
vulnerable people. And they couldn't imagine us being victims,
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
those victimized people. But we really were those victimized and vulnerable people at one time in our lives. It's almost like having survival's remorse because people see you in a strong light. They see you as such a strong person. And in my line of work, the people, they don't see me, but they hear me on the phone. And
Mhm.
they say all the time, like, oh, your voice, it sounds so strong. And, if they knew me then, if they saw me then when I was going through my trauma and going through my toxic moments in my life, they would
Mhm.
see, that
Mhm. Mhm.
that it's definitely been a transition.
Mhm. Mhm.
Angie, redefine cognitive reappraisal.
Cognitive reappraisal.
Mm.
That's when we reframe thoughts about something
Okay.
that happened. We have a different emotional response about it.
Right.
That's basically all it is. Basically thinking on that cognitive level because your cognitive part of your brain is your thoughts. And so
Hmm.
that's basically all we're doing is reframing those thoughts, right? And
Right.
and we're reframing those thoughts to change the emotional response about the thoughts.
Right. Because those thoughts, in most cases, those are the intrusive thoughts.
Mhm. Mhm.
We have on a daily basis, though, intrusive thoughts,
Right.
and there's a percentage of the amount of thoughts that we have that are just strictly intrusive. And these are thoughts that do nothing for our current state. But yet we find ourselves ruminating on these thoughts and even ruminating where there was a negative trauma. Since trauma is attached to that, if you find yourself ruminating over, let's say, the breakup or ruminating over that toxic conversation that took place in a relationship where, it kind of went left and you broke
Mhm.
up, or
Mhm. Mhm.
the narcissistic response that you got where the person is saying you did something or you didn't do something and you're sitting there ruminating over it like I didn't do that though. It's a serious extent to injury if you're in that thought process for a prolonged amount of time.
Mhm.
It can
Mhm.
be damaging. It can be
Mhm.
damaging to your mental health.
That's exactly right. What you're talking about the ruminating thoughts. That's actually a long-term response from trauma. And what we have to basically understand is that there's a difference between we have flashbacks when it come
Mhm.
down to trauma. So a lot of times we get flashbacks and remembering things mixed up. So basically, there's a difference between a remembrance and a flashback.
Okay.
So, you can remember things that, played out at a funeral, what went on, you
Mhm.
those things kind of stick with you.
Right.
But our flashback is different because the flashback is what causes a trigger, right? So
Wow.
I could be sitting there thinking about everything that took place at the funeral, but I can also have a flashback of when that person was killed.
Mm.
So
And
let's just say that person got hit by a car and I was right there and I saw everything.
wow.
So the remembering the funeral would be one thing. Seeing what actually happened would be a flashback. So that's more traumatizing
Mm.
than a remembrance. So that's the part that causes a trigger.
Goodness.
You can recall past events. You can recall past events. That's the same thing as remembering something. But a
Right.
flashback is on a whole nother level. It's a whole different thing because it's way more intense. You know, it's like you reliving something. It's like
Right.
it puts you right back in that moment again. And that is a result of long-term trauma.
Mm, mm,
Um,
mm.
and so that's what a lot of people are experiencing. That's why they have some people have impulsive reactions to things, and you know, thinking that we when we see people that have that may react to something like
Mhm.
this. Let's just say any people react on impulse.
Okay.
Okay, if a person acts on impulse, and let's just say what happened don't even match with how they responded. You see
Oh,
what I'm
yeah.
saying?
Yeah.
So you can say, let's just say, for instance, the little girl that got killed at the McDonald's.
Okay.
So this guy comes and he's upset because he's waiting in line too long, or she got his order wrong.
Mhm.
And he flies off the handle and goes and kill her.
Right.
You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? That's you acted on impulse.
Right.
And that
Yeah.
had, what happened don't even match the response.
It's like that post traumatic stress
Yes.
and neurosis. It can be a form of neuroticism where
Mm-hmm.
which it's a poor self regulation or inability to regulate your emotions. Uh,
Exactly. Interesting how people respond to trauma. It doesn't always come off appropriately. Sometimes, and we've talked about this before, but a lot of times we don't. A lot of times we won't understand how people respond or why they respond in the way they responded.
mhm.
But that's when we become, and we talk about this all the time, being trauma informed.
Right.
And that'll be another topic that we will discuss on how to
Yes.
become a trauma informed person.
Right.
And so that way you will be able to identify when a person is responding out of some type of post traumatic stress.
Mhm.
Because most people that you see reacting, like I was talking about the guy at McDonald's, he responded from some form of post traumatic stress.
It came out, yeah, it did. It came out of nowhere. And, I knew a relative that you would be talking to her, and then all of a sudden she would just start laughing hysterically.
Mm-hmm.
And you would say to yourself, okay, well, what's happening? Because that doesn't match, like you were saying, the
Mm-hmm.
behavior doesn't match what's
Right.
happening in the event. But
Mm-hmm.
I later learned that there was an issue there with her, with how it was something that stemmed from a trauma that she had in her life. So that as a coping mechanism,
Mm-hmm.
she would develop this laugh whenever she would find herself, I guess, stressed out. I later learned in life that was her way of coping with whatever trauma or
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
stresses or the stresses that she was experiencing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, it was really irrational, like an irrational anxiety almost. Uh,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but like I said, I later learned that it was because of her trauma.
Right. And you're right. And then that was definitely neurotic. Another example of neurosis would be like people who just constantly worry all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they just worry about everything. Their anxiety is always through the roof. They fear things that don't even need to be feared. Like people who have a fear of going outside, agoraphobia is what
Agoraphobia,
they
you're right.
called it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so they have a fear of going outside, fear of being in places where there's a lot of people. That form of neurosis, these people are easily irritated,
Yeah.
They have mood swings all the time. And usually neurosis is secondary to something else,
Mhm.
it's secondary to something. It's secondary to another mental disorder. Could be a type of trauma they witness, whether it be the acute, whether it comes from a single incident, whether it comes from prolonged or chronic trauma. It comes from somewhere,
Wow. And we don't want to make you fearful of trauma.
right?
Really want to just teach you how to embrace it because we have had to do that ourselves.
Right.
Uh, and we're still embracing our traumas as we sit here today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we present this to the public is it's not anything in the way of making anyone fearful of going inward. There's
Mm-hmm.
healing in this. And so we're going to be introducing a lot of different things to you in the future. We appreciate your feedback.
Mm-hmm.
I like what you're saying about positive coping mechanisms,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
that was very good. Can you expound on that a little bit more?
So positive coping mechanism would be things like you and I had to do. We had to practice these things ourselves. Positive coping mechanism would be things like meditating,
Mm-hmm.
uh, even positive affirmations.
Yes.
A lot of times, you can speak life into yourself.
Mm-hmm.
When you start to spread positivity in the universe and you speak things into the atmosphere, you can manifest
Yes.
peace. You can
Yes.
manifest peace. You can manifest your own inner strength.
Yeah.
One of mine is I'm more drawn to nature, so I like to take walks in nature. I hike. I take
Mhm.
walks in the wood. Being where I am now, I have a lot of access to mountains and open
Yes, you
spaces.
do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful.
So I love it, and because I can embrace the open spaces. I embrace just the nature. The nature is where I re-energize, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a good coping mechanism for me. Then, another one for a little while I did self-isolate.
Okay.
Um
Yeah.
I did self-isolate. I only self-isolated to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm.
And it was only most of the time it was to meditate. And so I spent a lot of time with God. I spent a lot of time reading. I spent a lot of time doing research, educating myself. That's a big thing too. Once you start to educate yourself, you that will a lot of that will bring about a lot of healing because
Yeah.
you learn a lot about yourself that you had no clue of.
Mm-hmm.
You when you start to embrace those, like we talked about earlier, embracing those emotions and,
Mm-hmm.
and asking yourself, why am I feeling like this? You're basically
Yeah.
trying to understand yourself. And once you start to understand yourself, the quicker you can heal yourself because you basically, you embracing it, you're talking about it. And also we talk basically positive coping mechanism versus negative coping mechanism. No, I didn't go to drinking, but there's a but right there because during the time that I was in the situation I was in, I can't even tell you that I didn't drink
Yeah.
because
Understood.
there was a lot of time, and I can remember a lot of Christmas that I was actually depressed.
Yes, I
Um,
can. Mm.
I can remember sitting in my bathtub drinking, and I don't even drink like that, but I was so depressed, and it was the holidays, and everybody know that holidays bring about depression. But
Yes.
you you wouldn't think that you would be depressed inside of a marriage. You wouldn't think that you'd be feeling so alone inside of a marriage. And
Yeah.
so I felt these feelings inside of my own house. And that's exactly what I did. I started drinking. It didn't last long, but I did. I just can remember that time,
Yeah.
and that was a pretty dark time. That was a pretty dark time in my life,
Mm-hmm.
that I never forgot. I never smoked. I've never smoked anything like that. I tried to not do things that would intensify it, make it worse.
Uh-huh.
I try to stay away from it because I didn't want to. First of all, alcohol is a depressive. It's going to make you more depressed. A lot of people that smoke weed
Mm-hmm.
and that's their coping thing. People who have anxiety, who are just smoking weed like crazy all the time because it keeps them so calm. Weed is also a depressant.
Yes. It is.
It's
It is.
it's a downer, and so it's like you already down, but you doing things that make you even more down.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? Sometimes I would take, long drives. I would, because I like to take road trips and stuff. I would just embrace and being by myself and basically spending time in my own thoughts. And so you develop healthy coping mechanism when you can sit in your own thoughts. You
Mm-hmm.
you you cultivate a healthy environment for yourself when you can spend time in your thoughts, and then you can embrace those thoughts, and then you start to understand why you think the way you do. I know a
Exactly.
lot of people that cannot do that. I know a lot of people that hate being by themselves.
Hmm.
You know, and but they're dealing with so many other things, but they they're trying to fill the void,
Yeah.
and so
They haven't
they
made that connection. They haven't made
yeah
that connection
they
yet.
constantly they're trying to do everything else to keep that mind busy,
Hmm.
so they won't have to go into their own thoughts, because like we talk about depression, they'll go into a depression and they scared they can't come back out.
Exactly. And that part right there is getting into your own self.
Mm-hmm.
It is a process. It's a process for some. Learning the honest truth about yourself and your life. It can be difficult.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It can to hear and go back to and go through the process of. But what we have to realize though is the longer that you are in denial or wait to do this,
Mm-hmm.
first of all, there's going to be things that will happen in your life that's going to cause you to look at life differently. And so that's the first instincts, those are the instincts right there. Your instincts is
Right.
like, wow, something different has happened in my life. And most people go into denial right then and there or try to justify why it happened. They
Mm-hmm.
go down
Mm-hmm.
that rabbit hole. And I even heard someone say, to you need to get out of denial and into clarity.
Yeah.
um, Creating that mindset, in return, it builds character. I used to hear someone say as a kid, someone would come to that person and say, hurt my knee or I'm hurting. And the first thing they would say is, well, you'll be all right. It builds character.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, Coming out of denial and into clarity will definitely build character in you.
Right. Right.
It'll help you learn because we have this tendency to think that we know everything about ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I learned was that we don't know half as much about ourselves as we could if we could become more self-aware. I learned a ton more about
Mm-hmm.
myself once I became self-aware.
Right. That's exactly right. I myself, I learned a lot of even more humility. I learned even more compassion
Hmm.
people, and it was just from the things that I went through. And the Bible talks about how Jesus learned obedience. He learned
Yeah.
compassion from the things that he suffered through. And
Yes.
so that's how things really are supposed to be. Once you go through things and you see, you feel the hurt, you feel the pain, you feel the shame. A lot of times would make you more better of a person, because and you're more compassionate of a person, because you wouldn't dare want to see somebody else go through the
Yeah.
thing that you went through.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but that's like I said, you have to spend a lot of time with yourself. You have to start to understand yourself and know who
Mhm.
you are. And then like I say all the time, when you know yourself and you know who you are, nobody can tell you who you are. And
Mm.
that's one thing that I learned, that, you have a mind, and you have your own thoughts, you have your own feelings. And sometimes you can come into contact with people who will try to tell you about yourself. And then they'll give you all their advice, say, I think you should do this, and maybe you should just get over it. I think you should be over that by now. But they're not you.
Right.
You know what I'm
Right.
saying? Um, and with me, I just learned that I didn't want to be that person, just walking around in the world by my, just walking around aimlessly,
Mhm.
walking around with no goal, no purpose. And so people can come out and tell you about yourself all day.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah, they will
you,
too.
you would actually, when people start telling you about you and you don't know yourself, you will believe what they say.
Yes.
You will be like, well, maybe I am too overbearing, or maybe I am just, maybe I'm being paranoid, or maybe I'm being, because that's what somebody told you.
Mhm.
You see what I'm saying? And so I've learned that now. It's like when I hear people start talking to me, or want to, or try to tell me about myself, I shut it down real fast, because you don't even know me. So, and You never even seen the things that I've seen. You haven't been where I've been. It's okay to seek advice sometimes from other people, but I've always looked at it like it depends on the source, because I'm not going to seek advice from anybody. Like, me and Marcia, we talk all the time, and we bounce some ideas and stuff off of each other all the time. And she may,
Yes.
tell me her take on something that I have, or I tell her my take on something, you know.
Right.
But the thing is, she knows me and I know her. So,
Exactly.
but the thing is, I appreciate it, that I can
I
do
do
that.
too.
And
I
you
do
have,
too.
but this goes back to way back when we talked about at the beginning of this, finding your people.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Because when I knew, I said, well, I only really talk to Marcia about a lot of things, that I don't even really talk my own belly about, because
Same here.
she understands this thing. She's already went through a lot of similar things that I've went through. She's felt kind of the same and still do feel the same things that I feel. So
Yeah,
it's different when you have somebody who's on that same wavelength.
that is true. And it's just like any other relationship, though, it has to work. And I tell people this all the time in my line of work with helping them find counselors and therapists, because they'll come back and say, well, I didn't like this about them and I didn't like that. And that's perfectly okay.
Mm-hmm,
Because
mm-hmm.
anytime you are socializing, and building relationships and trying to maintain relationships, it has to work out. There has to be a commonality that brings you together. And you were talking about getting back to knowing who you are so
Mm-hmm.
that no one else can tell you who you are and
Mm-hmm.
or about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't do that,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it sets you up for
Yes.
trauma. It sets you up for
Mm-hmm.
toxic relationships. You go down this rabbit hole that either some people are still in that rabbit hole.
Mm-hmm.
They know that they need to get out of that rabbit hole. They
Mm-hmm.
can't even
Mm-hmm.
find the hole to get back out.
Right. That's exactly right.
And I would think that you would agree too, that it's a blessing to know that we were blessed enough to get out the rabbit hole.
Right. That's exactly right.
So,
That's
but you
exact.
were bringing up CPTSD. That's a tongue twister. CPTSD.
Mm-hmm.
What is CPTSD?
So CPTSD is complex post-traumatic stress disorder. You have
Okay.
PTSD, which everybody knows about. And people hear it all the time. Oh, you have PTSD, and you hear it all the time. Okay. PTSD is different than CPTSD. PTSD is what we would relate to as being the big T, which is
Okay.
the big trauma.
Okay.
And then CPTSD would be the little T, which is the little trauma, right?
Okay.
Um, so basically, complex trauma would be something like verbal abuse, say domestic violence, where, we could say verbal abuse inside domestic violence. Uh,
Okay.
we could say childhood abuse.
Mhm.
Don't necessarily have to be physical. We could talk
Okay.
about childhood abuse being neglect.
Okay.
So basically, the way I try to break it down is the big T is something that happened, a big event, something that really happened, bad,
Okay.
like a murder or a rape or something like that. And then the CPSD would be something that should have happened that didn't happen, like
Mm.
a person who was neglected and should have been looked after or taken care of,
Okay.
or
Good.
or even abandonment, right?
Mm.
Like people like say get abandoned. You got to think about like childhood abuse. We're talking about kids who just like the stuff that's going on right now, with kids getting snatched away from their parents. You know what I'm saying? That's like abandonment.
Yeah. Yes,
And
it
these
is.
kids are getting left to fend for themselves. That means if they don't have any family members or anybody they're like lost in the world.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
abandonment. So that's what we call complex PTSD.
Mm. And I would imagine that would make them become kind of hypervigilant too. They learn a lot about the world in a short amount of time too.
Yes, yes,
Being
yes,
in those
yes.
type of situations, so basically it's how you respond to the complex trauma. It's
Mm-hmm.
how you respond to it. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Because this we also discuss hypervigilance.
Yeah.
I was telling myself, I still kind of deal with that myself.
Me too.
I I I still deal with hypervigilance. And it'd be like hypervigilance is more like a state of heightened alertness and watchfulness.
Mm-hmm.
And it just kind of puts you in a constant state of being on guard.
Yes.
You know, that's me being self-aware. That's
Yep.
me knowing that I still deal with that.
Mhm.
Knowing that I will probably always deal with that. Um, that's just with how the world is going now, kind of like you still in there, always in that fight or flight mode.
Oh yeah, most
Mm-hmm.
definitely. I'm saying to myself, rightfully so at this point in this world today, we're in that state of hypervigilance, which is it's a heightened for some and it's a learning process for others,
Right. Mm-hmm.
which is a good
Mm-hmm.
thing. Unfortunately, it's a good thing in an unfortunate situation of events,
Right.
and because these are life lessons that you learn as you mature, though. I remember a time I didn't even watch the news as much as I watch the news now.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all. That's a part of hypervigilance now too. So it's happening. They say that statistically, though, that a person has the capability to embrace 100 people.
Mm-hmm.
But when it gets down to how they interact with you and how much they influence you, it
Mm-hmm.
drastically reduces to 10% of that population of people,
Right.
because we
Right.
don't have the capacity to know everything about 100 people.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to take you to develop some kind of understanding in order to getting to know people,
Mm-hmm.
and having healthy encounters. That's I think I would say that's the premise of this topic of Trail of Trauma, is learning how to have healthy encounters with people, whether these encounters are positive ones or negative ones or challenging ones, I guess I should say. Whether you're embracing or discarding, you need to get an understanding who your people truly are. I really think that book was good, Finding Your People, because it can take a long time, um, for some people, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and others it may not. But I'm not gonna lie, I'm 54, and it shouldn't have taken for me
Right.
to be 54 to where I'm just learning how to maintain good mental health. But unfortunately, it did take that long. Learn about interpersonal relationships. My trail of trauma made it take that long.
Right.
So
Right.
becoming hypervigilant has always helped me immensely in this process. Yes, we can overdo it,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
being hyper vigilant all the time. And that's why it's important to develop, your self-awareness, and to learn how to assess that. That's where that comes into play, because you have to be you have to and you have
Mm-hmm.
to know how to assess that about yourself. Once you learn and start embracing trauma, though, and then you want to start working on those inner conflicts, come out on the other side, though, that part,
Right. Right.
got to do the dirty work first, of that self-awareness and going in and trying to find out your place and what it is you need to do. But
Mm-hmm.
in doing so, you come out on the other side, and that'll become your everyday walk in life.
Right. Right. Right.
And I'm always in a constant state of check myself first before I check anybody else.
Right. Same. Same. Same for
uh,
me. I
I
look at
want to
that
make
too.
sure. Hmm.
Yes. I got to make sure that it's not me,
Right.
because we so quick to blame somebody else, and we got to make sure that we're not projecting. We got to make
Exactly.
sure that we're not projecting our feelings on somebody else. We got to
Yeah.
make sure that just because we say some rise up and against and threaten us or make us feel insecure, something like that, we got to make sure that the way we respond is not out of our own insecurities, and ask yourself, is this, what is this? Is what am I feeling? Once again, we're talking about being self-aware of your emotions, what your thoughts, or why am I thinking like this? Why did I think like that? Or why did that
Mm-hmm.
thought on my mind anyway? Like I say, it's a lot of, all this comes from CPTSD.
Yes.
It comes from complex post-traumatic stress. Marcia and I can both say that we have some form of CPTSD.
Yes.
Just like the
Great.
hypervigilance, that's a form of CPTSD. I'll say that is a result of CPTSD. Another example of CPTSD would be having a negative view on yourself or a negative view of the world itself.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people do have a negative view of the world, even though, don't get me wrong, it's not like the world is all that. But right
Correct.
now, but
Right.
we're not going to walk around and just kind of respond to everything that's happening in the world. We're not going to let that get inside of our spirits and then we just going to respond to all the stuff that's happening and make it a personal thing. We're not
Right.
going to do that. Because a lot of times, a lot of what's happening is they watch the news constantly and
Mm-hmm.
they come into this state of fear. And now they're fearful. And now they don't want to go outside. And now they, they're just scared, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we can't even focus on the negativity of other people because,
Mm-hmm.
so we focus on negativity in other people that look like we're reflecting our own self. Like I said, our own issues, our own insecurities. We can't, if you come into a place where somebody is being negative all the time, like you might be at your job and you got negative Nancy
Mm-hmm.
that is always negative at work all the time, and you know this already. So
Right.
her her emotions should not affect you. The way she is should not affect you as a person.
If you have the right, if you've already developed a good
Emotional intelligence.
emotional intelligence.
And you're gonna hear us say that so many times
Yes.
because that is a big deal to help you to not respond to everything you see or hear. You know,
Exactly.
but there's a lot of symptoms of CPTSD. CPTSD is something else that we call chronic trauma.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty much long term. And it's basically the after effects. That last for last for several years sometimes. The anxiety. Some people just live in a state of constant anxiety, and that's what is a result of this CPTSD. Um, some people deal with anger for several years. Some people deal with depression for several years. Some people even have self-destructive behavior.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, you know, uh, some people have this give up spirit where they can really care what happens. They don't really care what happened to them or they don't care what happened to you,
Yeah. Yeah.
but those kind of people, you have to know how to deal with or
Yeah.
don't deal with at all.
Yeah, and that's true. You have to learn how to stay grounded.
Yeah,
Don't and as it was told to me, don't let nobody knock you off your square.
that's
Um,
it. That's it.
because people are going to have confirmation biases within themselves, like how they interpret new evidence or things that are events that are going on, and so it's very important that we don't get swept away
Right.
with the way they perceive it. A lot of times we even get in relationships where we get swept up into a person's confirmation bias of how they interpret the world,
Uh-huh.
how they interpret people, how they interpret relationships.
Uh-huh.
Being in a relationship, and the person told me, you want your life to be like Claire Huxtable
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
because of their own traumas and their own perception of what
Right.
a person that's trying to better themselves
Uh-huh.
and
Uh-huh.
that want what's best for themselves and their family. Yes, I was told that. And those confirmation biases can really get us in trouble because we connect to those biases. And like I said, that becomes our reality, though. That's the extent to injury with connecting with people that are in that mindset because
Yes.
their reality becomes our reality,
That's
and vice versa.
right.
Um, so
Right. Right.
reassessing our own positions in life appropriately, that's why it's so That's why it's so important to go back to our traumas. That's what the
Mm-hmm.
topic of this
Mm-hmm.
discussion is about. It's a trail of trauma because you'll be surprised if you start digging into it and start looking at some things, you'll learn this and start developing positive behaviors. And then what'll happen is, start changing your behaviors and how you see things. And you'll start emitting positive energies out
Right.
into the world instead of toxic energies.
Yes, 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 yes. And um, we talked about chronic traumas. We're talking about chronic trauma, which is long-term trauma, abuse and neglect as well. You and I talked about systemic oppression.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Systemic oppression is a form of long-term trauma. That's
Mm-hmm.
like racism, people who have disabilities, people who are being discriminated against their disabilities, people
Yep.
who are homosexuals, lesbians, the LGBTQ, that population
Mm-hmm.
definitely deal with a lot of PTSD and CPTSD. That population deals with a lot of mental anguish
Mm-hmm.
because of the bias.
Yeah.
There's a lot of prejudice and a lot of bias that surrounds all of that, and it relates to chronic trauma. So they they have long-term effects from, and they will probably always have long-term effects because of their gender. And we got the transgender, you got the,
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying, so that they have to deal with society, and then they
Yeah.
have to deal with the biases of society.
That
So that
comes along.
causes, yeah,
Yeah.
that causes systemic oppression, you
Mm-hmm.
know.
It does. And that's, all of these things. We have a lot. We have a lot of information to bring to
Mm-hmm.
you.
Yeah.
We're going to talk more about trauma later on in other episodes too.
Yeah.
But we're going to move on to some other topics as well. So, we really and truly enjoy your feedback though on this as we do bring the message to you. And we're going to wrap up here. But Angela has something that she wants to share with you, a scripture that's really relative to today's topic regarding trauma.
So yeah, so just in closing, there's a scripture that I always, held in my heart. Uh and you always have to have a word that you hold
Yes.
near.
Yes,
The Bible
indeed.
says that word that I've had in my heart, that I may not sin against you.
Mhm.
So you always got to have a word somewhere around that you can just go straight to. And
Yes.
so, but this is just one from Proverbs 4:7 that said, it says that wisdom is the principal thing. And it says,
Mhm.
therefore, get wisdom. And it says, in all thy getting, get an understanding. And so
Mm.
basically, that verse basically emphasizes the importance of wisdom. And it also emphasizes the importance of understanding. And not even just in just, once you start to understand yourself, and once you start to understand all these terms and things that me and Marcia and I put out, it'll start to make a whole lot of more sense.
Yes.
Um, Everything will just start making sense because now you have developed that awareness.
Yes, indeed. And so again, we're going to have more content coming to you, but we're going to end it here for now. We enjoy bringing this message again to you. So just look out for more information.
Okay, y'all. We'll see you guys on the next episode.
Have a good day. Bye bye.